Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
This is Charlotte Canion, and I'm the author of You Have to Laugh to Keep from Crying. And we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Tyra Manning and her book, Where the Water Meets the Sand, and her new book that's coming out in October, Your Turn. And I can't read the title here. It's Ways of Celebrating Life Through Storytelling. Welcome to the show, Tyra.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your background, because I think it's fascinating.
Well, I grew up in West Texas, in Seminole, Texas, and went to school at Texas Tech. Met my husband there, and his dream was to be a pilot. He went to the Vietnam War, and during that time, I hospitalized myself at the Menninger Clinic because of clinical depression. During that time, Larry was killed, and he told me through cassettes, we didn't have email at that time, that I needed to get well so I could meet him in Hawaii where the water meets the sand on the beach. And so Larry was killed while I was there, but 35 years later, the Air Force sent my daughter and I to Hawaii on that very same beach at the military hotel where we were going to stay. And we accepted his remains and flew back to Arlington and had his funeral there. So that's where the water meets the sand. It's about hope, love, really work on debunking the stigma toward people who suffer with mental illness, because I went on to have the opportunity to be a school teacher, principal, and superintendent of schools till I retired in 2004.
And that just is a fascinating story. And I can see now, you know, where you got the title of the book and all, and that is just very, very intriguing. Now, within your book, how did you construct it? I think you mentioned that earlier. We were kind of talking about, you told a lot of different little stories. And can you give us a little bit of the outline and the gist of what that book is?
I'm talking about Your Turn now, which is coming out in October. And when I published Where the Water Meets the Sand, so many people would say to me, how did you write that book? And I would say, I told my stories, and you have stories. Everyone has stories. And so I decided that I wanted to write a book about how to write your stories. So it's based on themes, and if it's okay, because I don't have them all memorized, I'm a little bit nervous, but not much.
It's okay.
So one of them, the first one is the introduction, and it's called Listening to Your Inner Voice. And then things like Love and Larry, freedom from addictions, grief, choosing gratitude, mentors matter, and there are several more. And I write a story for each or more than one little story or example in each of those chapters. And at the end of every chapter, there's a section called Your Turn. And there are prompts included there. And I don't know if it would be okay with you and Alan, but there's just one little paragraph that sort of puts together the idea of memories of people who changed your life, or little stories. And I just have a
Yes, share.
May I read it? It's in the introduction, and I'm talking to the reader, trying to help them see they all have stories. And when we share our stories, we find out we're more alike than different, which is so important this political time we're in. So here's the story. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that pop into our mind when we least expect them to. They are often spurred by seeing or doing something that reminds us of a particular event or person. I didn't intend to think about my grandfather, Pawpaw, who grew watermelon in West Texas. When I saw a watermelon in the grocery store recently, It brought back memories when I was a small child, searching with Papa for the best watermelon in the patch. Okay, Tyra, he grinned as he broke the watermelon in half, plunged his huge hand into the center, and pulled out the sweet, dripping red heart. Sit here. He lifted me onto the bumper of his truck. This is the best eating there is.
Oh, that's neat.
So that was just my introduction, and I have some of those because I'm convinced that when we tell our stories, we celebrate the people in our lives, our wins and our loses. We find out that we're all more alike than different. And so it's getting a lot of media press, and I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, we have a lot in common because mine is a collection of stories, you know, and I go out and speak a lot, and I try to convince seniors to share their stories so they don't pass on and those stories die with them. So that, you know, you and I have the same kind of passion. Now, tell us a little bit more about your life. I didn't hear much about, can you go back to where the water meets the sand and tell us, you know, what did you encompass in that book?
Well, that's the one where I mentioned, I didn't mention this at the time. When I was 9 years old, my father died of a heart attack, and it broke my heart. He and I were very close. I had a brother, and my mother would always say, Rodney is my little boy, and Daddy would say, Tyra is my little girl. Well, then when Daddy died, and I was only 9, I truly mourned for years his loss. And there's a section on addictions. I'm a recovering alcoholic of 38 years. When I was a teenager, I started drinking beer, going to Hobbs, New Mexico at the state line and buying beer. And so I was a troubled kid. When Larry and I married, I thought and believed that I had found my soulmate, and I think I did. But his dream was to fly an airplane, and as a result, I fell apart, was diagnosed with clinical depression, checked myself into the Menninger Clinic, the famous Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas. And that's where I was when he was killed. When I left there after 8 months, I brought my daughter to Topeka, Kansas, and we made a life there. And that was my first teaching job after I got finished my degree. And I had the privilege of working with different kinds of people. And I talk about that in Where the Water Meets the Sand, the children that I taught, because I worked in the famous Board of Education district, 1954. And when I started there in the junior high school, the majority of my children were children of color, either African American or Hispanic. And they thought I had a funny accent, but they were special to me, and really catapulted me into wanting to be a principal and someday a superintendent.
It sounds like a lot. Grief has surrounded you in life, and you are actually kind of and I hate to use this word, but you're kind of a guru on it, and you can help others as they go through the grief, and maybe not go as deep as you said you did, and that's what you're sharing in your book. Am I correct?
In Where the Water Meets the Sand, I had a wonderful doctor there, and I adored him and trusted him. And when I share that story of being at the Menninger Clinic, sometimes people, particularly when I first published Where the Water Meets the Sand, people would say, "Oh, Tyra, you weren't like those people." And I would say, yes, I was. I had the credentials. So part of it, and I do speaking events at NAMI as well. I want people to know that the stigma is something that pushes people away. But when we share, we really do see that there's help to be had if we can find it for people or encourage them not to be embarrassed or ashamed that they need some extra a hand up.
And you've decided to speak up, and thank you very much for that. because a lot of people go through this grief and don't know how to deal with it. If you had to, and we're coming kind of to the end of the first session, but if you in a couple of sentences could give something from your book, a word of advice, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you're telling someone how to deal with that grief, or what's the first thing they need to remember?
Remember the good times first. Focus on the good times. Because even though someone passes and we lose them, they're always in a relationship with us. We never forget them. And we remember the good times. And when we remember the sad times, we know that that's life. And when we talk about it, it's not such a horrible thing. It's just natural.
Yeah. Well, Tyra, hang on. And
I will.
listeners, y'all hang with us, because we are going to learn more about Dr. Tyra Manning and her book, Where the Water Meets the Sand, and your turn to tell your stories.
What would you do if you had to put your life on hold to parent your parents? You have to laugh to keep from crying. How to Parent Your Parents is a must-read book full of antidotes and practical advice to help parenting your parents. Author Charlotte Canion provides insights to help prepare anyone facing the challenges of caring for elderly parents. Check out our website at www.howtoparentyourparents.net.
National Authors Day is November 2nd, 2019 in Houston, Texas. Join us at Discovery Green as we celebrate being a published author and remind the world of the great books that writers constantly create for your enjoyment. You can register at authors.dearindy.org.
Hello, I am the author and poet Denise Bryson. I am the author of The Things That Cross My Mind, Love's Reality, both in book and audio form. I am also noted as one of the best poets of 2011. I have two new projects coming up. One is the Blinky series, where Blinky tells us all about our coins and our bills for our children. I also have a book coming out called Say Ye. It's quotes from Denise Bryson, just inspirational and that will help you along the way.
Hi, this is Alan at Ask Alan Anything, a podcast designed to help you learn about publishing and marketing your books. So join us live on Facebook at 8 p.m. Central Daylight Time. The page is Indie Beacon Radio. Ask any questions about publishing and marketing your book. We're here to help you, and we've been doing it for a long time. So I hope to see you then. Thanks.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
This is Charlotte Canion, and we are speaking with a fascinating lady. Her name is Dr. Tyra Manning, and she's had quite a life. And I think I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think that your books were therapy for yourself?
I think it was important after all those years to write down the feelings and the things that happened. And I actually still had some handwritten letters from my husband who was killed in Vietnam. And also, I was encouraged at the Menninger Clinic when I was hospitalized there to write down my feelings. And I still have some of those. So that made a big difference. I wanted to mention, Charlotte, that in this book, the Your Turn book, I have a section on creativity, spirituality, and I love, when I was superintendent, having grown up in West Texas, I was superintendent of schools in River Forest, right next to Oak Park, Illinois. And that was a lovely community. And I wanted to do something to say thank you to the parents and the board members and the teachers. And my mother loved to cook when I was a youngster, and she made the best barbecue brisket. So I started a tradition during the holidays, right before the Christmas break. The most I ever made for one, I would work over the weekend, and I would bake huge, 7, 12 to 9 depended, because more and more people would come. I would invite the village fathers and ladies and the presidents of the universities, and they would come and I would serve my barbecue brisket. I had a board member that made Mexican cornbread, and I made chili as well. Served as many as 200, 250 people, but I ladled every one of those meals. So there's a chapter in my Your Term that says breaking bread and why it's important in terms of our relationships to eat with people and to share. And so I've got some recipes in there for the chili and brisket in that section, in that chapter. So there are a lot of happy things. I had an uncle that was trying to teach me to ride horses when I was a youngster, and he was a cowboy, and his name was, we called him Uncle Sonny. He left home to join the rodeo, much to the distress of my grandfather. But one day I was about 12 years old, and I went out to the corral, and he said, Uncle Sonny, can you teach me to ride? And I said, I'm kind of afraid of horses. And he said, that's not good. Old socks will smell the fear. But anyway, he got me up on old socks, and we were doing well. Uncle Sonny was leading him, and then he let go. And he said, now just keep your feet straight in the stirrups. And I started to slip a little bit, and I fell off. And Uncle Sonny said, I'm not going to say a bad word here because we're on TV, but Uncle Sonny said, damn it, Tyra, let go of the reins, or you're going to get dragged through the so 4-letter word. I'll never, ever forget that. And I write about how many times as an adult, as a teacher, as a friend, I would think I knew the right thing for somebody or somehow it should be done. And I learned, I could hear Uncle Sonny in my voice, Tyra, let go of the rope. You're going to get dragged through the, and it was a story and a lesson I've never forgotten. So there's a story called Letting Go in my little chapter and in my little book. So there are just personal things that I know that all other people have, but they may not think they're worth stories, but they are worth stories. They're important, and they're important if they want to publish and speak on things that they've learned. If not, I helped my mother write her stories. We put in a little shutterfly bound book. Mm-hmm. And when my mother passed 3 years ago at the age of 90, over 90, everybody wanted copies of Mother's book, Shutterflies. And so we printed those up so they could have them. But so I have to say, I come from a family of storytellers.
Storytellers, yeah. Don't you believe that we learn from those negative times in our life or those down times? That's when we grow and learn, not particularly from our successes. I mean, the successes are great, but I think we learn from those down times, and you are a perfect example of that. And
it gets better. It gets better, but you're right. Without problems, we don't appreciate the good days. Everybody has good days and bad days, but it's human nature, I think, sometimes, that if we're having a bad day, we just think, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me. And when I was a drinking person, it was pour me a drink. So that was back in the day. So I make a big deal. I'm very grateful to my higher power and the support group that helped me stop drinking 38 years ago. And I think and there's a lot of storytelling in those support groups too. So I've had constant opportunity to tell stories and to listen to other people's stories. And that's why I have the prompts. I really am hoping that the result of this book is not so much to read my stories, but for people to say, I can do that, and I can pass my stories on, and that will make a difference.
Yeah. Was there one story, or maybe there were several, but one that your daughter was surprised when she read it in your book? Or when you shared that you were going to, you know?
She was surprised that I talked about my alcoholism as openly as I did. And she was also, because I left the Menninger Clinic in 1971 and moved to Topeka. Interestingly, Dr. Walt Menninger's children came to my school to be, when I was principal. And when I told he and his wife that I'd been a patient there, they were so thrilled. You know, people, the more we talk about our successes and the travails we've had, the more people realize I can overcome, and I'm not such a bad guy or gal if I had to go through that. And it's just been amazing to me how generous people have been for both of these books. And I bet you've had that same experience, Charlotte, where people are just generous.
Yes. It's amazing me how God's opening doors everywhere.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, my book was the best self-help book last year, voted by the Texas authors. And, you know, it's just amazing. I've been in magazines and done radio and TV, and I'm having the time of my life. I think life just...
Yes.
Well, you talk about that. We're about the same genre.
We are. And
you know, if we can pass on some of that wisdom, it's good to do.
I agree. Somebody said to me, the cover of your book, what are all these things? I said, all the things that we need to, pencils, typewriters, computers, erasers, and a cup of Brevi coffee.
Now, you said your book is coming out. When is it coming out?
October the 1st this year.
October the 1st this year.
The publisher this book is She Writes Press by Brooke Warner, owns that publication.
Okay. We're getting ready to wrap this segment up. Is there one last bit of advice you want to give? Or one phrase from your book?
I think maybe an interesting story, and the poem is too long because I never thought of myself as a poet. But when they called me and told me that Larry's remains were coming home after 35 years, I couldn't sleep that night.
Well, yeah.
And I woke and I sat out on my porch with the porch light on, and I wrote a poem. And the poem is in the book, and it's long.
Okay.
But it says, coming home, you're coming home in a box, not strewn all over the desert floor, not in little pieces. And at the end of it, I'm not quoting exactly because I'm not reading it. But now I can put all your bones from all those times and put them in a box, not scattered over the jungle floor or the desert. And when I need to remember, I'll take it off the shelf in my mind, and I'll remember the good times.
Well, Tyra, we're going to take a break right here.
Okay.
And we're going to come back and talk to Dr. Tyra Manning.
Authors, do you know the true cost of being published? In the Author's Revolution workbook, BL and Bourgeois gives you hands-on tools to use and to understand the true cost of being published. He will also give you information about low-cost or free programs that are designed to help you market your book. BL and Bourgeois has been helping hundreds of authors since 2011, educating them on how to better market and sell their books. Buy the Author's Revolution workbook exclusively at indielector.store.
Hi, Brakefield and Berkey here, award-winning authors for the Techno Thrillers books, the Enigma book series. Technology, today's weapon of choice, the cyber good guys versus the cyber bad guys.
We invite you to join our website, theenigmaseries.com, where you will get sample chapters, sample audibles, book trailers, and you can sign up for our mailing list. The books are available in ebook, paperback, and Audible. Thank you.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today.
This is Charlotte Canion. I'm your host, and we have had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Tyra Manning, and she's the author of Where the Water Meets the Sand and her new book, Your Turn, Ways to Celebrate Life Through Stories. And I'll bet she is a fabulous storyteller. Let me ask you this. You said that you do share and you speak a lot. Tell us about one of your most memorable times when you spoke and shared about your stories.
The most memorable was the first time that I spoke to an audience of about 200 people, and it was a sit-down dinner. The reason it was so amazing was my new book had come out, Where the Water Meets the Sand, and I had been on the board for a counseling, community health, mental health organization in Oak Park, Illinois, right next to River Forest, where I had retired as superintendent when my book came out. And they invited me to come up and tell my story. And during that time, not only to tell my story, but they paid for the books to give to everybody. In that audience were board members, teachers, their families, all these people that I had worked with as superintendent of schools, who now were going to hear about my mental health issues, and how I got better and why it was so important to have great services. I mentioned the fact that as a teenager, I was an unwed mother, and you could just hear the gasp, because not because they were judging, but because they saw me put together as the superintendent I was. But I wrote both of these books partially to help people understand we all have journeys. And sometimes we go down walks and go down roads that seem like they're terrible. But at the end, if we are open to getting better and there are people reaching out to us, it can be the very best miracle that ever happened to us. And so I think that was in terms of an event and they were so proud and so amazed and so kind. And I realized these big secrets that we keep, they just make us ill. All of these secrets that people carry, afraid to share. And I'm not suggesting people need to tell all of the business if they don't feel like telling, but if it's going to help somebody or encourage somebody to seek help or to reach out to a friend or a family member, it's worth it. It makes a huge difference. And then in the grief chapter, Charlie, I just want to make one thing. When my mother passed, there's a little story about when my mother passed. I had brought her to Bernie, where I live, and she was at the Memory Center. But long story short, Mother was always, after Dad died, she got her degree, and she was a third grade teacher and a primary school librarian, and she was always very tailored. And she had a bag that she wanted me to bring to the care center when I brought her to live in Bernie. And she said, when I go, that's the dress I want to wear is there. So my sister and I never looked in. So one time I peeked in and I saw pink, because Mother's favorite color was pink, and I just zipped it back up. So when we got to Seminole, to our hometown, my sister and I went to the funeral home, and my family.
Tyra, we're at the end of our time.
No, I just want to tell you one word.
Yes.
Just want to tell you, the point at the end was that when I saw Mother laying there, she had on this beautiful lace, pink, chiffon sort of dress and nothing tailored. And I don't know why, Charlotte, that made such an impact on me, but it did.
Okay. Well, Tyra, we want to thank you again for sharing your story with us and for sharing your story with the world. This is Charlotte Canion, and I want you to remember one thing. A rose is like a book. You can't know beauty until you look at it. And a book is like a rose. You won't know its full beauty until you open it. This is Charlotte Canion.
Thank you for listening to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. To learn more about Indie Beacon services, to be a guest on the show, or to advertise on our show, please visit our website at indiebeacon.com.